When people use the phrase forcing God to help you, it often comes from frustration, from long seasons of unanswered prayers, from watching life move forward for others while you remain stuck. But the truth is that God is not a God you compel by pressure. He is a God who responds faithfully to his own laws. So the real secret is not manipulation, but alignment. When you truly understand this, you stop praying blindly and start positioning yourself for predictable intervention. God becomes committed to you because you have become committed to the patterns that govern his operation. This is the kind of understanding that shifts you from begging God to experiencing the consistency of his help. The kingdom of God operates on spiritual laws, laws that function with the same reliability as physical laws. Gravity does not choose who to work for. Whoever steps into his system experiences its effect. In the same way, the laws of honor, obedience, faith, mercy, giving, and purity carry predictable outcomes. When you ignore them, you cry for mercy. When you align with them, you walk in favor. What many call forcing God is really discovering what God already tied himself to. He placed his name, his integrity, his faithfulness, and his reputation on the reliability of his principles. If you step into them, results must follow. The problem is that many believers pray for divine help while violating the very laws that activate that help. You cannot break the law of obedience and expect divine backing. You cannot despise people and expect favor. You cannot live in fear and expect breakthrough. God honors his word above all else, and his word structures the patterns that summon his intervention. So the question is not, how do I force God? The question is, which principle am I neglecting? Because in spiritual matters, ignorance is costly. The realm of the spirit does not excuse sincerity. It rewards alignment. This is why revelation is powerful. When light comes, struggle ends. When you know what God honors, you stop fighting unnecessary battles. You stop praying amiss. You stop waiting for miracles that were never tied to prayer alone. Many breakthroughs are not prayer dependent. They are principle dependent. Prayer strengthens your relationship with God, but principles govern results. You can pray for financial lifting for years, but until you step into diligence, integrity, generosity, and value, your prayer will not override the law. You can pray for favor, but if you dishonor people, heaven's help cannot manifest. So it is not about forcing God. It is about cooperating with the systems he already designed for your lifting. When alignment becomes your lifestyle, divine help becomes your advantage. You will begin to see God show up in ways that look supernatural, but they are simply the predictable reactions of spiritual laws. The right words, the right people, the right opportunities will begin to flow toward you because you have stepped into the pathways that attract them. God is not withholding help. Many simply stand outside the patterns that would release it. The moment your life starts matching his instructions, his commitment to you becomes visible. This is why the most powerful prayer is often, Lord, show me what must change in me. The moment you ask that sincerely, heaven begins to reveal the instructions, adjustments, and postures you need to adopt. When you obey, doors begin to open. When you align, grace begins to speak. When you surrender, his help becomes unavoidable. In the end, you do not force God. You become the kind of person God delights to help. Alignment becomes the bridge that turns prayers into testimony and desire into manifestation. There is a posture in the spirit that God cannot ignore. A condition of the heart that draws his attention faster than 1,000 loud prayers. And that posture is brokenness, not weakness, not self-pity, but a sincere collapse of pride, a recognition of human limitation, a yielding that says, Lord, without you I am nothing. This kind of heart becomes a magnet for divine intervention. God may overlook eloquence. He may overlook religious performance, but he never overlooks brokenness. It is the highest signal of sincerity, and sincerity is the language that moves heaven. The reason brokenness attracts God is simple. Pride is the greatest barrier between man and divine help. Pride is the subconscious belief that we can navigate life without God, that our strength is enough, that our intelligence can replace dependence. But brokenness shatters that illusion. It brings you to the place where your soul knows that except the Lord builds a house, the labor is wasted. Brokenness is the realization that human strength has limits, but divine grace does not. It is the place where you stop pretending before God and allow him to see you exactly as you are. In that moment, God draws near not to judge, but to restore. Many people pray, fast, shout, and claim promises, but still do not experience the kind of intervention they desire because their hearts are full of resistance. They want help without yielding. They want divine backing without surrender. You cannot hold on to self-sufficiency and expect supernatural assistance. God resists the proud, not because he hates them, but because pride is a closed door. It leaves no room for God to enter. Brokenness opens that door. It tells heaven, I am available, I am teachable, I am ready to align with you. That posture commands attention. Brokenness is not emotional collapse. It is not crying endlessly and calling it humility. True brokenness is a spiritual condition. It is the death of rebellion, the end of excuses, the willingness to let God be right even when his instructions are inconvenient. It is when you stop arguing with the process and stop resisting the pruning. This is the place where God becomes obligated to lift you because you have reduced yourself enough for him to take full expression through you. He exalts the humble because humility gives him space. Pride creates a wall. Brokenness creates an altar. This is why the greatest transformations in scripture and in life often start in moments of brokenness. When a man reaches the end of his strength, he finally sees the beginning of God's power. When your own strategies collapse, you finally become ready for divine wisdom. When you admit your need, grace finds you. God does not run toward perfection. He runs towards sincerity. He is drawn to the heart that says, Lord, help me not because I deserve it, but because I cannot continue without you. Such honesty becomes irresistible to heaven. Brokenness also produces sensitivity. It clears the noise of ego and opens your spiritual hearing. Suddenly you can sense divine instructions. You can hear the whispers that pride once drowned out. You can recognize where you missed it and where alignment must take place. You are no longer defensive, you are receptive. And when reception increases, direction becomes clearer. And when direction is clear, destiny becomes predictable. In the end, brokenness does not reduce you, it rescues you. It is the posture that turns your weakness into God's strength, your limitation into his opportunity, your silence into his intervention. When you come before God in genuine brokenness, you do not remain the same. Heaven responds. Grace flows. Help comes. Because God cannot resist a heart that has truly fallen at his feet, not in defeat, but in surrender. Covenant is the language of consistency in the realm of the spirit. It is the assurance that God is not relating with you emotionally, but legally. Many people think divine intervention is random, unpredictable, or based on how desperate they sound in prayer. But the truth remains, God is bound to respond to his covenant. A covenant is stronger than feelings, stronger than seasons, stronger than situations. When you understand it and participate in its demands, you step into a realm where divine help becomes a guaranteed outcome, not a hopeful expectation. God does not respond to people, he responds to patterns. He does not respond to emotion, he responds to alignment with his covenant. Every time a man walks within the boundaries of a covenant instruction, heaven becomes committed to an outcome. This is why scripture shows patterns of men who experience impossible interventions, not because they manipulated God, but because they understood what God tied himself to. When you discover those covenant pathways, your life stops depending on luck. You stop waiting for miracles that appear randomly. You begin to experience the faithfulness of God in a structured, predictable way. Every covenant responsibility demands action from you before it releases reaction from God. Prayer is a covenant practice. Giving is a covenant practice. Worship is a covenant practice. Kindness and mercy are covenant practices. Integrity, forgiveness, fasting, standing in faith, these are not religious activities. They are covenant triggers. Each one carries a promise tied to it. The problem is that many people want the promise without the practice. They want the reaction without the responsibility. God cannot violate his own system to reward a life that ignores his structure. He is merciful, but he is also just. And justice means he honors what he has said. What many interpret as forcing God to help them is really them engaging covenant responsibilities consistently until the results become inevitable. When you practice the covenant of giving, you activate the covenant of provision. When you practice the covenant of prayer, you activate the covenant of answered petitions. When you practice the covenant of worship, you activate the covenant of divine presence. When you practice mercy toward others, you activate the covenant of mercy from God in times of trouble. There is no covenant. Responsibility that ends in emptiness. God is too faithful to ignore what he instructed. Covenant practice also teaches you discipline. It eliminates the illusion that God can be bribed with occasional spiritual activity. A man who tithes once in a year cannot command the same consistency as a man who does it faithfully. A person who prays only during crisis cannot experience the depth of someone who has built a life of communion. You cannot sow a seed today and expect a harvest every day. Yet there are people who practice the principles of generosity consistently and therefore enjoy a consistent flow of favor. Covenant practices shape character, and character shapes destiny. The beauty of covenant is that it moves you from emotional Christianity to structured spirituality. You stop depending on your mood and start depending on the laws that govern results. You stop living in confusion and start living in clarity. You know what to do to provoke heaven's response. You know what to avoid so you don't interrupt your own breakthrough. You recognize that God's commitment to you grows as your commitment to his principles becomes deeper. Covenant practice also opens you to divine remembrance. Heaven does not forget the sacrifices of aligned people. A prayer you prayed 6 months ago can speak for you in a moment of crisis. A seed you sowed years ago can open a door when your strength fails. A moment of obedience you took seriously can rescue you from a future disaster you didn't even see coming. God ties your future to the integrity of your covenant work. At the end of the day, you do not force God. You activate him. You provoke his integrity by engaging what he cannot ignore. And when you live within the boundaries of covenant, you will see that God is more eager to help you than you ever imagined. His faithfulness becomes predictable. His favor becomes consistent. And his intervention becomes your lifestyle. There is a mystery in the kingdom that many overlook. The moment God becomes your priority, your life becomes his responsibility. When a man truly places the agenda of God above his own comfort, above his ambitions, above the applause of people, heaven begins to rearrange things in his favor without him begging for it. Divine help flows naturally toward those who have chosen to put the interests of God first. Kingdom prioritization is not a slogan. It is a spiritual alignment that forces every area of your life to come under divine supervision. Most people approach God with a transactional mindset, asking for blessings without offering themselves. They want divine attention without divine alignment. But God responds differently to the man who comes to him, not merely for what he can give, but for who he is and what he represents. When your heart beats for his will, his desire, his purpose on earth, you enter a realm where your needs start becoming God's project. Your battles become his burden. Your dreams become part of his agenda. And because God never abandons his agenda, you find yourself lifted even when you didn't pray for certain things. This is why prioritizing the kingdom changes everything. When you honor God in your decisions, when you consider his principles before your emotions, when you choose righteousness over convenience, you are declaring by your actions that he is Lord indeed. And where he is Lord, he is responsible. Many believers experience frustration because they want God to fix areas of their lives they have not surrendered to him. They want heavenly help for matters they still handle with the wisdom of the flesh. But when you say, Lord, you come first, you give him access to govern your affairs. In that access lies your help. Kingdom prioritization is practical. It is seen in how you treat people, how you steward opportunities, how you use your resources, how you manage influence, how you respond to pressure. It is in choosing integrity when compromise seems rewarding. It is in choosing obedience even when others mock your commitment. It is in treating divine instructions as more important than public opinion. When God sees this posture, he commits to you at a level that prayer alone cannot secure, because God invests in those who invest in his interest. There are realms of favor that are reserved for those who choose kingdom over convenience. Doors open because heaven recognizes your loyalty. People rise to defend you because the grace you carry compels them. Resources begin to flow toward you because you have proven to God that you will use them to advance what matters to him. This is not manipulation, it is alignment. You cannot prioritize God and be ignored by him. You cannot honor his purpose and walk without help. His kingdom does not run on the strength of men, so he empowers those who give their strength to him. Kingdom prioritization also transforms your desires. You begin to want what God wants, and because of that, your prayers become more powerful. Heaven responds quickly because the request echoes the heartbeat of God. You stop praying out of desperation and start praying out of revelation. And revelation-based prayer draws faster responses because it is aligned with divine intention. When you live with the consciousness that your life must represent God well, your job, your family, your character, your decisions, divine help becomes your inheritance. You will find God orchestrating opportunities you never imagined, placing you in rooms you did not qualify for, fighting battles you did not even know existed. This is what happens when your life becomes a platform for his glory. God becomes obligated to defend what reflects him. In the end, you are not forcing God, you are prioritizing him. And when God becomes your priority, help becomes your portion. Destiny becomes clearer, battles become easier, and breakthroughs become consistent because heaven supports every life that honors the King. Many people assume that because they are in pain, because they are crying, because life has become unbearable, God is automatically moved to intervene. But the truth is deeper. Pain may touch God's heart, but sacrifice moves his hand. Emotion is human in nature, but sacrifice is spiritual. Tears can express your desperation, but sacrifice proves your commitment. And in the kingdom, it is commitment, not mere emotion, that activates divine intervention. God responds to a man who is willing to lay something down in honor of his instruction, his presence, or his purpose. Sacrifice is powerful because it confronts the strongest part of the human soul self. It demands that you give up comfort, pride, convenience, or something valuable. And it shifts your posture from Lord, do it for me, to Lord, I am yielded to you. That shift is what provokes divine attention. Sacrifice breaks the hold of self-sufficiency. It tells heaven that you trust God enough to let go of something meaningful. And trust is the currency of the kingdom. When you truly trust God, he takes responsibility for your outcome. God has always honored sacrifice. Not because he needs what you give, but because sacrifice is proof of depth. It reveals the sincerity of your pursuit. Many people pray for God's help, but refuse to sacrifice anything: time, ego, pleasure, resources, or wrong habits. They want change without cost, transformation without surrender, favor without obedience. But nothing powerful in the realm of the spirit is cheap. Every dimension of breakthrough has a price. That price is not always money. Often it is obedience, discipline, character, silence, forgiveness, or faithfulness when it is not convenient. Sacrifice is often private. It is the decision to pray when the flesh wants sleep. It is the discipline to stay pure when temptation is loud. It is the courage to walk away from relationships God did not approve. It is the wisdom to release what God instructs you to. Give even when your logic disagrees. These silent decisions speak loudly in the spirit. While men may never see them, heaven records every sacrifice. And when the season of reward or intervention comes, it is those sacrifices that summon divine help. Sacrifice also purifies motives. It exposes whether you seek God for who he is or only for what he gives. Anyone can love God on the mountain, but sacrifice proves your loyalty in the valley. When God sees that you are willing to do his will, even when it is hard, he sends help even when it looks impossible. Divine intervention is attracted to genuine surrender. Sacrifice is surrender in action. What many call forcing God to help them is actually them offering a sacrifice God cannot ignore. When Abraham placed Isaac on the altar, God responded not because of the physical act, but because of the heart behind it. When Hannah poured out her soul, giving up her desire for personal satisfaction and offering her child back to God before receiving him, heaven reacted immediately. When David said he would not offer God what cost him nothing, he stepped into a dimension of favor that followed him all his life. These patterns were not emotional moments, they were sacrificial alignments. Sacrifice is also the bridge between seasons. Whenever God is shifting you into a new dimension, he will ask you for something. Not because he wants to take from you, but because he wants to break your attachment to the level you are living. You cannot enter a higher realm in the spirit while clinging to the securities of the old. Sacrifice cuts the rope. It prepares your heart for elevation. In the end, sacrifice is not about losing. It is about positioning. God never leaves a surrendered heart empty. What you give up in obedience returns as multiplied grace. What you release in faith comes back as divine help. What you surrender on the altar becomes the platform for your next breakthrough. Sacrifice has a voice, and that voice reaches heaven. It may not be comfortable, but it is always powerful. And when you engage it sincerely, you will see God respond in ways emotion alone could never provoke. Faith is powerful, but faith alone is not enough. Many people believe God can help them. Many declare promises. Many quote scriptures with confidence, yet they remain stuck in cycles that never break. The missing ingredient is patience, the quiet force that sustains faith until manifestation arrives. Faith speaks, but patience holds. Faith declares what will happen, but patience endures until it does. When these two work together, divine intervention becomes inevitable. It is not about forcing God. It is about staying aligned long enough for what he already intended to manifest. Patience is not passivity. It is not sitting and hoping something changes. Patience is spiritual stamina. It is the ability to maintain your confession, your obedience, your discipline, your expectations, even when circumstances contradict what you believe. This is where many people faint. They start with fire but cannot stay with consistency. They shout in January, but complain in March. They sow in faith today, but uproot the seed tomorrow in frustration. Yet in the spirit, nothing matures instantly. Even miracles have pathways. Even breakthroughs have processes. Patience refuses to abort what faith has conceived. There are seasons where God answers quickly, but there are also seasons where he trains you through waiting. Not because he wants to punish, but because waiting shapes your capacity. If God gave you everything instantly, you would collapse under the weight of what you ask. Waiting stretches you. It builds discipline, character, discernment, and gratitude. Waiting exposes your real motives. Waiting reveals whether you trust God or you are simply impatient with him. When you wait with the right posture, heaven recognizes it as faith in motion. Patience is faith's endurance. Patience also protects you from spiritual miscarriage. Many people destroy their own answers by reacting emotionally to delays. They change their confession, they abandon divine instructions, they walk away from principles that were meant to uphold their breakthrough. The moment your patience collapses, the process collapses with it. You cannot receive in doubt what you initiated in faith. Patience ensures that your spirit remains stable until the season shifts. It keeps you from canceling your own prophecy. There are doors in the spirit that only open to those who keep standing. Some results require maturity. Some blessings require preparation. Some levels require endurance. When God sees that your faith is not fragile, when he sees that you will not abandon him because of time, he releases what belongs to you. Heaven trusts stable people. Divine help flows toward those who are unshaken. God cannot build with a heart that breaks under pressure, but he can lift a heart that endures. Patience also aligns you with divine timing. Not every delay is denial. Sometimes the timing must synchronize with purpose. You may be ready emotionally, but the environment is not ready, the people are not ready, or the season is not yet prepared. If God blesses you outside the right timing, the blessing can become warfare. Patience keeps you in step with the rhythm of heaven, so that when the help comes, it comes without sorrow. Faith and patience together make you unstoppable. Faith initiates the journey. Patience concludes it. Faith says God can. Patience says God will. And I will stand until he does. Faith opens the door. Patience keeps you in the room until the manifestation arrives. When these two operate in harmony, divine intervention is not just likely, it becomes mandatory. Heaven responds to consistency. In the end, faith and patience are not tools to force God. They are the posture that allows God's already determined plan to unfold in your life. When you believe and continue, when you pray and persist, when you sow and stay stable, when you obey and refuse to faint, you enter a realm where results must come. Because in the kingdom, faith plants the seed, but patience brings the harvest. And when the harvest comes, it arrives in a way that makes every second of waiting worth it.